Hello, everyone. It is Tuesday, September 5th, 2023. This is a meeting of the Cohasset Select Board. It is 6:32 right now. Tonight's meeting will be conducted on the Zoom platform and live streamed on Cohasset 143 TV and Cohasset's Facebook page. The public is invited to participate on the Zoom platform, which can be accessed using the link provided at the top of the posted agenda for tonight's meeting. Members of the board and other scheduled participants will be able to participate when called on by the chair. Board members will be able to ask questions of any participant. All votes taken at this meeting will be by roll call. Members of the public who wish to ask questions are asked to raise their virtual hand on Zoom, and at the discretion of the chair will be promoted into the meeting. Members must provide their full name and address for public record. Please note that comments on platforms other than Zoom will not be monitored. This meeting is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on Cohasset 143 TV. All right, so I'd like to start off with a roll call vote, please. Mr. Plex?
A roll call vote.
I'm sorry, roll call.
Chris Plex here.
Mr. Creighton?
Jack Creighton here.
Ms. Marr?
Ellen Mar present.
Jean Haley present. Okay. All are invited to join the board in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. First item on the agenda is exemption 6 for executive session. This is to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real estate if the chair declares an open meeting may have the detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body. The chair so declares. The board will discuss potential property acquisitions. I'd like to entertain a vote to go into executive session under exemption 6.
I move we go into executive session under exemption 6.
Second.
Okay. All right, now we'll do a roll call vote. Thanks. Mr.
Jack
Creighton?
Creighton, aye.
Ms. Marr?
Ellen Mar, aye.
Jean Haley Dippold, aye. Okay, we will go into executive session and intend to come back at approximately 7 o'clock and re-enter public session. Okay, hello, everyone. It is 7:10, September 5th, Cohasset Select Board. We are now going to 7 o'clock, public comment. Items not on the agenda. Anyone in the audience?
Nope.
Okay, great, thank you. 7:03, license permits events. Split Rock Social. As folks saw in their packet, there is a request for extension of hours, September 27th, 2023 until 10 PM for a PTO event. Is there anyone from Split Rock who would like to say anything?
Yep, I got Mr. Hilton this.
Oh, okay.
As we speak.
Mr. Hilton,
And I'm chief as well.
okay,
Yeah, hey guys, can you hear me?
yes.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing well, doing well.
Okay, great. You want to take 30 seconds to tell us about your request?
Yeah, so it was a pretty simple request. We're doing a party for the PTO Association for East School in Hingham. They combine, it's a joint event that they do with some of their curriculum planning, and they aren't able to get to Split Rock until about 7:30. So they were hoping to run the party until 10 o'clock that night. It's a Thursday night, actually, I believe, and yeah, pretty straightforward. They're just hoping to extend 1 hour for that night only.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Hilton. Is there anything Chief Quigley would like to say? I know he's in the audience. I don't know if he's weighing in for a different permit.
Nope, we did our investigation and there was no issues whatsoever.
Okay. Are there any questions of my fellow members of?
No.
Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to Split Rock to extend their hours on September 27th, 2023 until 10 PM.
Okay, is there a second?
Second?
All right, all those in favor, please vote aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right,
All set?
have fun.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. We are now moving on to the common vitular license for the Barrel at Cohasset. Is there anyone from the Barrel on?
I do not have anybody.
Okay. Is there any detail, because they already have a license, right, Tracy? And so what are they seeking to change?
So they
for
are
Ed.
looking to, they have a license to, the common vic, they just want to put up like a shelf along the window for the colder months, so that if someone orders a sandwich, they can sit there and have the sandwich.
Okay,
Common vic allows them to put in tables and benches or something like that.
okay, so this actually has nothing to do with alcohol. Are there any questions that the board has? So just for the public, if you couldn't hear Tracy, this is meant to allow them to open the window to serve sandwiches out of the barrel during the wintertime.
I'm sorry, open the window?
It's
No, it's-
seating.
It's to allow them
I'm
to have
sorry.
internal seating.
Internal seating,
In-
yes.
Is there a capacity limit in that building? In that
And yeah, that would have to be set by the,
fire department?
Probably be
and I
pretty,
don't think they'll get table. I think it's Trace said they just want to have like
A
a
bar.
standing bar.
Bar, okay, thank you.
all right, any questions? I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to accept the common victual, I can't say the word,
Victualler.
thank you, license of the Barrel at Cohasset as submitted.
Is there a second?
Second?
All right, all those in favor, please vote aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No one's opposed. Okay. We have pulled the change of manager item because of notification issues. So now we're moving on to Class 2 used car dealer license. Is Mr. Rattenberry in the audience?
I do not have him.
Okay.
He should be here.
All right. He is not here now, so. We can hold. We'll hold for a little bit until he gets here. All right, so now we're moving on to the next 7:15 Select Board Goals. So the first issue that we're looking at are school capital issues. This relates to the stabilization fund we've been discussing, as well as a feasibility study and next steps. So let's talk about the stabilization fund first. I know Ms. Marr has been working with our schools and school facility committee and our head of facilities on a repair list. Mind discussing that process a little bit
Sure.
and where it is?
Sure. So Jason Earls, who's the chair of the School Facilities Committee, and Nick Berardi and I had a meeting last week and discussed the AI3 output of their walkthrough for school repairs and maintenance that they outlined in a 1 to 3, a 3 to 5, and a 7, or 1 to 3, 5 to 7, and 7 to 10 year plan. Nick has since taken the list and done his own due diligence on the list and eliminated things that had been done and eliminated things that were just part of regular ongoing maintenance that should be done and not really capital expenditures. And he came up with his own list that'll be shared with the school committee tomorrow night at a meeting in which you and I will be going to. And then today, Jason and myself met on Zoom with Superintendent Sullivan and Sue Owen, who's the Director of Finance and Facilities for the schools, and Paul Carney, who is on the Facility and Finance Subcommittee, to discuss a little further and provide, answer some of their questions in terms of the mechanisms of the stabilization fund. How is it done? How is it used? Who gets to decide? And then some of the comparative, some of the details of the AI3 list that were of concern to the schools. And so Dr. Sullivan requested that, we have this broader conversation so all of the school committee members could hear the same thing tomorrow night.
And on the stabilization fund, I can fill in some of the blanks there. So the long-term finance committee has been working towards a report that I hope we're going to finalize within the next week, if not 2 weeks, but I think we're moving at a good clip right now. And one of the things we have been discussing is a stabilization fund policy, which was a part of the charge to the working group. And specifically what we've been doing there, just for everyone's background, is we do have an existing stabilization fund, our special ed stabilization fund. And much of the process is the same. State statute requires that if you create the special stabilization fund, if you create it, for example, at $1 million a year, the next year, and you have to have a ballot vote as well as a town meeting vote if you fund it through additional taxes, if you have a tax increase for that $1 million, and that's a 2/3 vote at each. So the next year, the way the statute works is the select board can increase the fund by 2.5%. Just, like Prop 2.5, you can increase taxes by 2.5%. We can decrease it at any point, including to 0. But once you decrease it, if we decreased it to, let's say, 500,000, then the following year, year 3, we could only increase it to 500,000 plus 2.5. We can't reset it that original million based on our research of the law. And Jennifer Mullen has talked to some communities that have done this fund too. So a part of what we're looking at is recommendations as to likely recommending to continue the fund as recommended initially and then grow it over time until we get to, a critical point in stabilizing the repairs both to the schools as well as roads and sidewalks. And not necessarily decreasing it unless there's a potential significant change. So let's say, for example, with the schools, we do a big project and we do a debt exclusion instead at the middle high school. Then we may want to decrease that stabilization fund to a certain amount, but still be mindful we need that money to still continue doing repairs at Osgood and Deer Hill. So I again, this is a preview and the group is still finalizing, but that's likely where it will be. And in terms of the process is going to be the same based on both state law and town meeting bylaws, which is any appropriations out of the fund. So if we say we want to build a new roof using the money in the fund, that requires a town meeting vote, which requires the same process of capital and advisory weighing in. Select board has to put it on the warrant. And so one of the suggestions I think the group will likely make is to begin that sort of strategic planning early in the fall, so everyone can sort of get on the same page, and invite the school committee to a hearing where we talk about the fund and the repairs needed, et cetera. So we can make a fully informed decision into the future.
Can I just clarify one thing on that? So, so at a special town meeting, the article is on the warrant to create the fund, and then the next article is on the warrant for the projects to spend the fund.
Yes,
And that allocation is or is not under the purview of capital budgets and advisory
yes. It would be a capital appropriation.
out of the stabilization fund.
Yes. It doesn't matter what fund it's coming from, it's still a capital spend. That
So
requires
if
a
they-
town meeting vote.
So in theory, they could not agree, even if all the other parties agree.
They could recommend against it, and then it's up to town meeting.
Okay.
Which, as a practical matter, could happen even if they didn't formally agree. They could still voice their opinion, but the way that I read our town bylaws is if there's a capital appropriation subject to town meeting approval, then, capital and advisory have a recommendation or not associated with that warrant article,
Okay,
because it's required to be a warrant article.
right. Okay.
Um,
We'll need to clarify that point tomorrow night.
Okay. And then the last part of the fund is, one of the things that we've been sort of toggling with is a part of the intent behind the fund is to add more money to the schools and what we have available to spend, not simply take the money we otherwise would have spent vis-a-vis the capital stabilization fund and just move it into a different bucket. And so we're trying to think through what are the sort of correct lines, maybe between what gets spent on a capital stabilization, what gets spent out of the fund. One thing we've discussed is, for example, if you were to buy a house, if you're buying the fixtures, the windows, all that, that's out of the capital stabilization fund. That's like a big immovable part of the infrastructure versus computers and desks and equipment that also get funded out of capital stabilization, but it's more like smaller recurring needs. Although I think there's still room for work and thinking through how to allocate what gets spent where. But the intent is to add to the school, the amount that we're putting towards our school, not to
Right.
just move it to a different bucket.
So, so over time, the schools have received, and I'm not quite sure if it's all been spent or not, but about 40% year over year of the capital CPC and free cash allocations for the town. So the intent is not to take that 40% and cut it with money because there's this extra bucket of money, but things like bus lease and technology and classroom furniture and things like that would still remain in the traditional capital
Yes.
stabilization fund.
Yes. Yes. And so we do, all this being said, we still have a list of repairs that is going to exceed 1.5 million per year for a very long time. Just so everyone is fully aware as the list gets refined. And that's going to require some continued discussions, particularly with the really big questions of the roof and the roof replacement and how we want to handle that at the middle high school. In terms of next steps, Ellen and I, we're going to go to the school committee tomorrow to discuss the fund and the process, also highlight fields and courts to make sure there was no Issue with Deer Hill, I don't think there is, but you know, just to make sure, as well as highlight to the school committee sort of the big picture of wanting them to support, you know, the overall infrastructure improvements we're aiming towards. But we are probably going to ask for their feedback on the repairs, as well as the, you know, try to answer any questions they have on the fund or concerns they have. And ultimately likely ask them for a vote on the stabilization fund, because I think it would be important to have their support for the fund, because it is for our school capital needs. But is there anything else that people want to add, or concerns about that approach, questions?
I think we need to be prepared for a larger ask. And I think we need to understand what that larger ask for the stabilization fund, how it would impact. Because even with Nick's list, even prorated out over time, it's $1.5 million every year. It will be challenging. And I think we'll be asked by the school committee, how can we get more? How do we make that number bigger? And can we just let the community vote?
So
We should be prepared.
so we should discuss the money. So if we were to do a $1.5 million stabilization fund, the way the finances work is that would be an approximate $400 increase in taxes for the median home, which is a $1 million assessment for that home. That is the equivalent of doing a $21 million project. So for example, a $1.5 million stabilization fund would be town hall if it came in at 21 million. Because we're hitting the tax roll all at once with the 1.5 million. And, you know, a debt exclusion is spread out over time. If we were to do 3 million, that would be an $800 tax increase for the median home.
And that goes every year.
Every year that we decide to continue the fund.
So once it's approved, the assumption is it'll be $1.5 million per year.
Continuing forward, so long as the select board continues to affirm 1.5 million, maybe times
And there'll
2.5%.
be no further elections require town meeting votes after that. But the
No,
select board.
It
can
will be the
vote.
select board election that will be the determining factor.
I think it would be useful to understand how the additional tax revenue compares to the repair list, to see if it's enough revenue to start turning the repair list into a shrinking list as opposed to an expanding list that it is today. That to me is the bright line. If we're putting forth enough money that we can start catching up on the repairs, and if the 1.5 million a year is not enough to start catching up on the repairs, I think it needs to be a larger number.
So what I would say from a long-term finance standpoint is, and we can have this conversation probably more fulsomely on September 12th,
Mhm.
maybe. But when you combine a variety of different tax increases out there, we are getting some pretty potentially high tax increases for the town to have to think through.
So having had, you know, 3 meetings, 3 meetings, however many in the last week, I'm just going to be a Monday morning quarterback and wonder if a stabilization fund is the correct mechanism as to and I don't know if you can do a debt exclusion for maintenance and repairs for not the whole number, but a larger number, to Chris's point, to that can really start making a dent in, I think Nick's top 10 items were $12 million. And so a debt exclusion is a different tax implication than a stabilization fund, right?
You could raise $21 million instead, but you'd pay it over 30 years,
Right.
the
So
$400.
so that would be a conversation with the schools to understand if that was something that was practical to spend in a year. You don't need to raise it in a year if you're going to spend it over 5.
Right. Right.
So my point of view is I'd like more input from the school facility side of this to understand what a number is that's going to reverse the trend. Keeping in mind that there may be other investments for the schools on the horizon.
I think we're getting into the realm of the long-term financial planning. Because as you overall look at this, the questions that are going to be raised is what percentage of the total tax burden is spent on the schools directly or indirectly. The perennial, they need a new school, and this I've heard, and we've all heard it. They need a school because they didn't fix up the old school. That's going to be an issue. So we need to be able to have a comprehensive understanding so that voters will have an intelligent vote. And that's, of course, the role of the long-term financial planning. So we should be prepared to answer those questions.
Although I think that, and this is where I think getting some feedback from the school committee and school facilities is going to be important, where we also, I think, need to understand, and we should talk about the feasibility study too, amidst all this. We could apply to the MSBA accelerated repair program for some of those bigger asks, like roofs. And so then we start to look at that list in a slightly different way, where we have enough for the fund to begin knocking some stuff off, but it's also combined with asks of the MSBA that, again, are different than the current ask that we have right now before them.
Yeah, so MSBA, the Accelerated Repair Program, is roofs, windows, and mechanicals like boilers and things like that. Nick did mention, and I don't know, Michelle, maybe you know more than I do, but he said that there has been some conversation about the roofs at Osgood and Deer Hill going solar, and that would be, roofs would essentially be free by doing that.
We did have a conversation with one of the solar companies regarding those roofs, and in absence of the middle school, high school, it doesn't make sense for them to put them on Osgood and Deer Hill, because the way they're positioned, it's not going to create enough solar energy to make it worth the while of the investment.
It would for middle high school? So if we could get the middle high school roof for free by doing solar, that's probably the biggest repair expense we're looking at on that list, like multiple millions.
The caveat to that is they won't do it while you're in the MSBA program, because there's no guarantee that if they put the solar on the roofs, that it's not going to be removed.
Okay. Okay. So maybe we get some feedback from the school committee on some of these issues, because we need it. So let's talk about the feasibility study. So just to catch everyone up quickly, the feasibility study was a request we got last year from School Facilities Committee and Mr. McClellan, and we were looking at a $1.5 million feasibility study, and that got narrowed down to $455 to do some of the baseline work to figure out more streamlined options, as well as some of the other foundational work that the MSBA would otherwise require, such as, topography assessment, from what I recall. And Jack, correct me if I'm wrong, because I think you were recollecting this earlier today too, but the discussions landed around a $450,000-ish feasibility study that Jason Earls had gotten from Vertex or AI3, one of the consultants he was working with. And so following from that, we just didn't feel we had enough time or information to push this forward, but we wanted to revisit this for this warrant as we are trying to figure out all of these moving pieces on the schools. Now, one of the moving pieces is we are applying to the MSBA program right now. We should know by December 23rd, I believe is the date. We did not get in last year. We're reapplying this year. And so part of the concern is if we spend money on the feasibility study, we'll just have to redo some of that study, if not a lot of that study, based on the MSBA requirements. The other consideration is we won't get into the MSBA for many years, and so we're trying to make all of these expensive decisions about repairs, but without having a sense of the bigger picture at the middle high school, which also is going to be challenging. So these are sort of the places that we find ourselves in. Thoughts?
I think it's worth noting that we gave a little bit of pushback and we got the figure down from over $1 million. Our challenge as a select board and for the town is that we have a lot of deferred things from over the years, chickens that are coming home to roost. And it's gonna cost some money, but we have to be very careful because if you take the maintenance and basically consumable and pay for it with long-term capital expenditures, that's a foolhardy, financial policy. So we've got to be aware of that. But that's, again, Jean, the importance of the long-term financial planning so we can put all of this in perspective. Because it's probably going to be a big ask for the money, and then you better make sure that it's one and done properly, or figure out a way work through it, but we don't really have all the facts yet. And that's why your committee's so important on that.
Well, and again, the long-term finance is not going to be opining on the feasibility study in the context
No,
of the
but
long-term
overall.
finance. It will present a general picture, but it's not even going to speculate on the cost of the school options because we don't know what they are and we don't know what the cost is. And so we can't even do the assessments because we don't have any reasonable straw man to plug in.
But we do want to start doing some of the repair work where we're falling behind in the interim, while we seek as much state funding as we can reasonably secure. And laying that out in a way that's going to be clear for folks so that we can get support at town meeting, I think is going to be very important. Because this is something that has come up a lot, it came up in the last town meeting. We just need to make sure we can clearly articulate our plan. And if that plan has branches, I think that's fine. We just need to let people know what's going on. I'm living in fear of another town meeting where we've got people standing under a tarp telling us we're not doing anything. When we are doing things, we need to explain what's happening, why it's beneficial, and what's going to happen in the future.
Deferred maintenance is the most expensive thing in the budget.
So-
It just compounds.
How does that influence your thoughts on a feasibility study, which would be a separate warrant article, likely funded out of free cash?
If the feasibility study advances securing state funding, then I think the feasibility study is a wise investment. Holding off on the feasibility study because we can't decide what we're going to apply for from state funding, then we're not doing our jobs. We have to take a position, put it out there, and try to move it forward and see if we can get support from the town for it.
What do you think, Jack?
I would tend to agree. The devil's in the details, exactly what's in that feasibility.
Yep.
Because it's kind of like a compass that guides us as to what needs to do. But we do need to figure out the extent of the problem. So I think we have to have some kind of feasibility or feasibility and options or whatever you want to call it.
Anything you want to say, or do you want to wait until you hear from the school committee?
No, I'll wait to hear from the school
Okay.
committee.
Okay,
I mean, just the application is in. So presenting a feasibility study to MSBA prior to the announcement date isn't gonna, in my experience, help one way or the other.
Okay.
But I think if it helps get us to a finish line quicker and more definitively, because I think we've had a lot of people working very, very hard in trying to get something, and I would like to see the finish line for, because it's a shame for people to work so hard and not get to something, so.
When
I
would
think
we-
you're,
I'm sorry. When would we have an answer? Not from the MS, whatever it's called,
an answer from who?
From who?
the state,
MSBA?
yeah, MSP.
December 23rd, I believe, is when.
Yeah, late
the-
December.
Or somewhere right before Christmas.
It's a gift for some and coal in the stocking for others.
Merry Christmas.
I think we should pursue the more streamlined version of the feasibility study. And we have to figure out exactly what that is, including what Jason Earls was suggesting last year, including looking at the information that can be repurposed for the MSBA if we do in fact get in, but more importantly, I think, give us some strategic direction on the options we have. And not just options, I would say financially feasible options too. I think that should be a component of the study, and they can look to our long-term financial report and talk with our finance director and others working on financial options to try to help us craft the big picture, not just from a topography standpoint and the other important things like educational needs, but also financial capacity. Because I do think that will help really advance the conversation in a very productive way. Regardless of what MSBA does or doesn't do, because then we can figure out how to best devote the stabilization funds.
Because MSBA will only cover the middle high school. So there's still maintenance and repair needs and upgrades needed at Osgood and Deer Hill.
Which is why the stabilization fund probably still makes sense at those
Regardless.
facilities, no matter what happens.
Well, I think it does. Let me ask the big question. What about the roof?
Well, so this is what, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, if the feasibility study comes back and says hypothetically, you can afford, a targeted renovation, what you really need is middle school, STEM, science, computer science here. And it will cost up to X amount, which we think, given your tax base, you can have a real discussion about, then we can target roof repairs in this section, knowing that this might be, the realistic option or options that we're looking at. But until we have more information, it's, I think, hard to make those
That's the
decisions.
problem. That's the dilemma.
Yeah, it's chicken and egg a little
Yeah,
bit.
because how much of the roof? Do we just do the gym? Can you do the gym? Does that, but that
It's not the roof that's over the gym, because we talked about that with Nick. It's the, I'm going to call it an air handling unit, and I'm sure that's the wrong, is that the right
Yeah, that's
terminology?
the right term.
That's one tonight I got. And the whole bottom of it has rotted. They have sealed it. They have tried to reinforce it. They have tried to gap it. And that unit needs to be replaced. And I recall even a few years ago, there was conversation about replacing that unit and moving it off the roof down to outside. Yeah, the utility, it's, I call it the utility closet between the administrative building and that stone wall that goes around to the gym. They were going to put it somewhere in there outside a pad. And I think isn't that where the exhaust from the shop room comes out as well? So they were going to put it there. And I honestly forget what happened to that. And then that would fix, because it's not necessarily the roof that's the problem. And the tarp, I understand, is gone. Okay, they have done a new collection system, which does not look like a canvas sail hanging from the ceiling. It's, Nick described it as a pan that I think is on a bit of an angle and will flow out, and it will,
Like an indoor gutter.
like an indoor gutter. Hasn't fixed the problem, but has fixed the optics of the problem. Is that correct too?
Okay.
Okay.
Didn't we set aside ARPA funds for the air handlers and then?
So capital appropriated money for the air handlers. They went out to bid 3 times. The first bid we got was in the 1.8 or $9 million range when we appropriated $450,000. The second time, we didn't get a single bid, and the third time, we didn't receive a single bid. So it's very challenging. Again, it's been a while. But,
All right, well, so is it fair to say then that the select board is, at least Chris, Jack, and I are generally inclined towards a feasibility study to better understand our options as we consider these pretty significant investments. But we're looking towards something that's not like a full feasibility study. We want something that's more streamlined
Yeah.
around the $400,000 mark we were talking about earlier. And that also considers the financial feasibility of options being presented by the consultant.
Recognizing we're going to have some decisions to make on December 23rd, we want something to inform those decisions with the understanding, we don't know what's going to come back on December 23rd, but we don't want to be starting from zero at that point.
Well, we might not have the feasibility study by then.
I'm not against it. I just.
Yeah,
need
yeah,
to
I know
learn.
you're still thinking through.
I'm still germinating on it.
I just want,
Kind of have a sense and a quarter, I guess, of the board.
yeah,
Oh, we're not voting, so it's
So we're
fine.
not voting. Yeah.
okay. And we'll come back and we'll report back, feedback we get from the school committee and go from there. In the interim, I think that, are we at the point where we think we want Chris to begin drafting warrant language both on the stabilization fund generally, which is like pretty straightforward legalese, as well as for a separate feasibility study?
Ms. Chris?
This Chris, not you, Chris, sorry, Chris, Mr. Senior. Do we want to start moving that forward?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. All right, we'll report back. Fields and courts. So where we last left off, you had a forum where there was seemingly a lot of positive feedback, right?
So there was a forum, we had positive feedback. I have been involved, but I'm going to delegate the update to Michelle. She's
Okay.
been pushing this and doing a great job, so
Great.
rather than I act as a conduit, Michelle.
So we reached out last week to Open Space and Recreation as well as the Recreation Commission. We asked if we could speak during their next meeting. So September 13 happens to be the Recreation Commission's next meeting. We're on there for an agenda item and for them to vote on the projects.
Okay.
I haven't heard back from Open Space and Recreation yet.
Okay,
And what I think we should do for our next step, we've been talking about estimates for a better part of a year now. I think maybe now's time to go out to bid on these projects and see what the actual costs are going to be. And I think we can have those project costs in hand by special town meeting. And obviously before then as well, to start really socializing. I think our estimates have been pretty spot on. We've escalated them according to the marketplace. So I think we're in a good position there. We do have some funding left over to have someone put out the bids for us. So that would likely be Activitas, since they're the ones intimately involved in all the projects. The only project they're not involved in would be the Beechwood Playground. However, they have specifications on the South Shore, so it's very easy to pick one of those up and put that out to bid. We will ask the people hold their pricing for a term of 60 to 90 days. And the only reason we think that they will do that is because we're going to the fall season. So it behooves them to line up their projects for the spring season. So I think we're positioned well for that. So I think we would just need a vote to have the RFP drafted and sent out by this board. And then I think the next step would be in tandem, apply to CPC for funding for these projects. And when we apply to CPC, we will only have estimates until the bids come back.
would anyone like to make a motion for the bids to move that process forward?
I would like to move that we move ahead with the requests for proposal.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor, please vote aye.
Aye.
Okay, great. One quick question, the aquifers, though, is that a part of the
turf.
The bottle fillers?
the bottle fillers? Yeah. Was that built, we had talked about having bottle fillers at some of like the tenant list as we're tearing stuff up, you know, a
There
tenant.
will be a bottle filler at the concession stand at Milliken.
Okay.
There's one planned for there.
Okay,
I don't believe we have any others planned.
Okay.
They're an easy add, so if it's something we should consider, we can certainly put them in the spec. If the Deer Hill, maybe one over here on Sawyer Street, since we have such an active recreation community over here. And they're easy enough to add.
yeah.
I think we can also look for other funding, you know, Cohasset Youth Baseball and Softball Association, maybe even for the Beechwood, because they'll have people playing on the, you know, on the baseball diamond and the field. I think we should look for,
I do think that there's a desire for something along those lines. But I don't want it to create too much extra work given everything else you've got going on.
That's an easy.
Okay, okay. Okay, so CPC funding, how do we want to approach this? Our CPC rep is not here today, Mr. Brady cannot attend. Do we have, well, here's what I would suggest in terms of two options. We can make a recommendation to CPC in terms of what the town's ask is, whether we want to do full or partial. You can wait to hear back from the long-term finance committee in terms of all the different tax increases we may be looking at that may inform what we're thinking about in terms of a CPC ask. We can just say, hey, let's bring this to CPC and begin the conversation and socializing the project.
I think the last is the way to go. Make sure it's on their radar. We can get
Agreed.
feedback on whether or not they have other major projects
Yeah.
planned that might exclude this.
Okay,
I agree.
I agree.
okay. And so Chris, are you, so one thing that I think we should do with CPC is when we go to them, we should make sure that major stakeholders are also there as well, you know, those who are, you know, who can explain the
Yeah.
needs of the community to, whether it's you, but also, you know, the other big groups like tennis, lacrosse, softball.
Different sports groups.
Yeah, I do think that's gonna be important.
So then would we need a vote at the point where we're ready to apply to CPC?
Yeah, I think that would make sense because I think that once we have all of the projects out there publicly, I think we can then look at the big picture and say, okay, we think this makes sense here for this reason. And then also bring that information to CPC.
And we can make that application with knowledge of what else is on their plate
Yep.
and what there might be.
Yeah, once we do more diligence on sort of what's out there on our side, but on their side too. And we can get information for them. There's some information in the long-term finance report on CPC, its past amounts, its capacity into the future, projections over, you know, X amount of time. And so that will be forthcoming in about probably maybe 2 weeks, the final report, but the draft will likely be finalized next week.
Okay.
Chris, can we also ask, sorry, Chris Senior, I'm so sorry. Chris Senior, can we also ask Jennifer Mullen to take a look at the capital balances and the CPC balances for any recreation fields, courts, Milliken, Beechwood? I started making a list from the last report from, I don't know, July 30th or something. And taking out whatever was encumbered, meaning something's in progress. There's not huge money, but I think it's responsible to look at that money and say it was intended for this use and we're going to use it for this use. The use has just changed and improved if a project's not going to happen.
Yeah, and I think would you say that's true of all the projects, not just fields and rec? Like if a project was supposed to happen and it didn't happen and there's funds sitting out there that really should be addressed.
Yes, and I believe that Jennifer is pretty good about transferring, like, I think there was, the Dare Hill School roof handler just couldn't happen, and that was transferred, what, for the track, right? We just voted on that earlier this year. So I do think that we could probably scrub a lot of it, and I know that certain projects get voted, I think particularly by CPC, to be extended for another year. It'll be 2018 town meeting, and then I think it's a 2 years.
Well, I know in the past, so Russ has had people come back and say, you know, give us a status update on your project. Is it moving forward? Do you still need all these funds? If not, tell us what you need so we can take the money back.
We can take it back or reallocate it or extend it if you're not ready.
CPC has done in the past
Yeah.
on their own, but we can certainly look at it.
Yeah, I think CPC will probably want to know accurate balances as they consider next steps. Okay, 7:56, let's see, where are we? Roads and sidewalks. So I did connect with Jay Pimpare, and Chris and Brian Joyce. And they right now are in the process of meeting on Thursday. And they have a pretty detailed schedule that's pulled from, what is it, 10-year road paving plan? Is that right? So Paul couldn't make it. So long story short, we're going to kick the item off into the future because Jay or Paul both are not able to attend. But they are in the process of putting together a plan with the punchline being, we can easily spend $1 million a year on road paving. We probably need more, but we can definitely find ways to spend the money. And they're going to put together like a little summary report on top just to explain the like voluminous Excel spreadsheets and go from there.
So,
Is it-
and again, it's the stabilization fund plus the already
Chapter 90.
allocated Chapter 90 money and capital money towards in 300,000.
So this would be different.
Okay.
The recommendation here would be, we would be taking that money, just any road paving need that the town pays for would come out of the road and sidewalk stabilization fund. And we would also use additional Chapter 90 money. And the reason why is to give capital some more money in the capital stabilization fund to fund other repairs to other buildings, like for example, our town hall or other places that we know we're gonna have needs for.
Okay. All right,
So it's not gonna be 1.3 million, it's gonna be 1 million total, if that makes sense.
okay. So we'll call them driveways and sidewalks did come up with the schools today. And
I saw that.
yeah, so in the past, it's been a school asked to capital, and that will be asked tomorrow night about where is it, and you know, just,
So Chris and Michelle, do we have a sense of where things like our school driveways and sidewalks fall? That's probably gonna be a pretty significant cost, just given the amount of paving we're looking at there, but if you could ask Brian to help us understand where that money is, because on one hand, it could come out of school stabilization, it could also come out of roads and sidewalks, right? And so,
And that's something that can be added I think it should be added actually to the paving.
yeah, I don't know how long ago it was paved or sort of where it sits on those lists, if anywhere. I suspect it probably doesn't sit anywhere because I don't recall seeing it on the tech consultant list.
yeah, that's because the schools kind of handled it. And I want
Yeah.
to say, over a 3 to 5 year period, we got maybe $500,000 to do.
Okay.
And a lot of it was patched, like the sidewalk going into the lower lobby, you know, we paved from the third block out to
Yeah,
the end. You know, it was mostly patchwork. It was not, and the driveway was never done, but the curbing is in bad shape. And it's considered a safety issue by the school department.
Is there any funding source the schools have other than the town and capital for those needs? I'm assuming not, but,
Not on that scale, no, they're,
okay. Okay.
So that was paid for out of the school budget or the,
no capital, years and years ago,
all right, okay.
the patching.
Customarily, all that, like this, parking lot and all the driveways in the various schools pays for it,
Would be capital,
capital, so the town pays for
the
it.
town pays
All
for it.
right.
There's no maintenance significant budget in the school budget,
Well, that's what I'm trying to zero in on.
yeah.
Okay. 8 o'clock, Mr. Callahan. You want the seat of honor?
And Judge Cutler is going to join us.
Oh, great. Welcome.
She's not on yet, but when I see her, I'll.
So we are now on agenda item zoning bylaw working group. Tom Callahan, you are going to be talking about proposed articles and a recommendation to the planning board for public hearing, which is the first procedural step in
Yes.
how we get something on the
That is
warrant.
planned for September 27th.
Okay.
I did reservations for 4 articles, but there'll only be 2.
Okay.
Can move up of town meeting by a month, kill the other 2. They'll go off to the spring. Spring will have a big agenda, just so everybody's aware of it.
You're mentally ready.
You know, we also had tough times during the summer, as Jack knows, getting quorum sometimes, and then we were always anticipating an early December town meeting.
Okay.
I got blown up, so here we are. So, but we did the 2 main things we wanted to accomplish for this fall.
Well, and Tom, just let me interject for a second. That was not just to torture you. That was to make sure we could get on the tax rolls in time for December.
The fact that it tortured,
That was what we.
The fact that that's just a bonus, right?
That's just a bonus.
Yes, no.
I
It's
will
not
say,
a
having served
judgment.
on this from the beginning, that Tom has done an excellent job, as has Judge Cutler. And we've tried to, as a committee, gear this to the ability of the town to move forward on this. So these things have been well thought out and carefully researched and prioritized, quite honestly. And
Yes, and we have, Mike Dickey joined us from the zoning board, so up to 6 members. That created one meeting this summer. It did create a new challenge for the quorum. We almost wish we were back to the smaller committee, but that's been helpful to have Mike on. So what you have tonight is changes to Article 4, which is our article about uses, and changes to Article 5, which is our area and dimensional requirements. In both cases, most of those are just rehashing, reorganizing, cleaning up what we already have. There's not a lot of new in either one. 4 is what we are going to have going forward. 5 is really just the housekeeping changes that 4 generates in terminology. There's only one new substantive addition to 5. If we do anything else to dimensional regulations, that will be in the spring. So any more substantive change on 5 is in the spring. Both articles also have amendments to Article 2, which we dealt with at the last town meeting, which is definitions, because changing of terminology has created changes in definitions. So they're both part and parcel of each of these articles. So the guiding principle behind Article 4 is to break it up into discussing primary uses and accessory uses. And much of what is in the old bylaw or the existing bylaw is carried over, just reorganized. The table of uses is shortened quite a bit because we've gone to the theory that we've discussed quite a bit about going into more broader categories of uses rather than micromanaging uses down to the nth degree. As far as anything new in here, accessory dwellings, which is currently in a separate article, Article 15, is going to be consolidated. And we are proposing that the ability to create an accessory dwelling be expanded to an accessory structure. over a garage or a shed, which we haven't had before, and we've discussed many times, in many forums about how that bylaw isn't used. It also allows for the creation of additions. Again, there's still the regulation that what's a change to a house still has to have it look like a single-family house, but there is provision for creating additions to accommodate an accessory dwelling. The size of accessory dwellings, we didn't change. The 10, we didn't change. We didn't think that was, we didn't want to have these things all over the place everywhere, but we are expanding the availability of its use. We also took the common driveway regulations that are currently found in Article 7. Those are moving into 4 as well. And the significant change there is that currently we can have possibly as many as 8 houses served by a common driveway, cutting that down to 4. Long ago, under the working group, our study of towns around us is the mean for that is usually 3. So 4, we think, is still sufficiently generous, but not as much as common driveways simply on a safety issue.
And Tom, I know you'll get the question, do we know how many parcels this might affect of those who are on a common drive anticipating, or just having a lot that they thought was buildable, but now might not be because that changed from.
Well, it's not a question of it not being buildable. And we're
Okay.
confronting that with an active project
Okay,
in front of us right now.
okay.
And the alternative is to go to a subdivision and create an actual road.
Road, okay. So
It's not
they
going
can
to.
build it, they'll just have to create
Right.
a created
We
road.
don't allow frontage on common driveways even today, so there's challenges in doing things off of the common driveway. So it's not, that shouldn't affect buildability, it's just going to affect the access to get to a particular number of lots. So 4 is still generous, it's above the norm, it's above the average of towns around us, so. So that's, and you have it now, I don't know if I sent it the last minute, the judge has put Article 4 into its warrant article organization. Article 5, we'll probably have for our next CBC meeting on the 11th. But you see the text there. Article 5 is very much carrying over a lot of the same things that are in there today. Again, it's mostly housekeeping driven by the changes that Article 4 generate. And the one addition to Article 5 substantively is that we're going to put in a height limit for accessory structures, which under our current bylaw, we don't have. And when we were talking about the height definition at the last town meeting and people were talking about apartments over garages, that kind of thing, well, Article 4 is going to let ADUs over garages happen. And Article 5 is going to set a height limit on them. And it's not 35 feet like it would be for a house, it'll be 25 feet. So that's what we're proposing for that, but that's the only substantive change. We talked about a height change in the harbor, but we realized at our last meeting, we got to think that one through a little more, so that if that changes, that will wait until spring.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Why on the accessory structure height limit is it 25 and not 35?
Because we don't want 2 structures of large size, so that you look like you have 2 single-family houses on a lot.
Okay. Is that,
And that
is
should
that, is that common? Is that the standard?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, you think about one little garage, an apartment above it, the 25 feet is more.
Okay.
Consider a floor to be 10 feet. So it's going to allow garage and then a
I
floor.
might weigh in a little bit of that. Allowing the accessory dwellings has been a big move forward, and it allows seniors to take part of their house and perhaps have somebody move in there, little extra income, perhaps they'll be able to stay in their home. It provides in-law space. There's lots of good things. What we don't want is it to be used as a backdoor way to, basically create density and create, 2, 3 families on a single family lot. So we've spent a lot of time making sure that it reflects what we want, but also preserves the character of Cohasset.
I see Judge, Judge, I don't know how much of what I was saying you heard, but maybe you could just give the general philosophy about the two articles and what we're trying to accomplish here?
Oh, sure. Well, just for your reference in the future, you can take a look at the recommendations that were made in the diagnostic report that we issued in October that we presented to the Board of Selectmen. There's a pretty extensive discussion of some of the issues with the current Article 4. It was probably the most difficult of all the articles to address this time around, and it really took some time and effort to get it updated and consistent with state law, adding in exempt uses, and really reorganizing the whole thing. One of the biggest changes is currently you have a table of uses that's in the appendix to the zoning bylaw. It's quite extensive and it has a lot of very specific use listings. Some groups that really aren't particularly related, they're just individual uses. And so what we tried to do is go through that list, peel off things that were just accessory uses as opposed to principal uses, and then group principal uses in more general categories, so that if a specific use does not appear in the table, that's not fatal. It's not automatically prohibited. Instead, you go to the description of the principal uses, and there are, I think, about 40 of them that we've described in quite detail as to what we're talking about, giving examples of uses. If a particular use falls within one of those categories, then it's treated in that category. And even though it's not maybe mentioned in the description, if it fits the description, it's okay, or not okay, as the case may be. So that was like a big change in the bylaw, and part of it was driven by the fact that you had a provision, or you have one now, that is really must have appeared many years ago, because it is now an impermissible permission. And it says if you don't list a particular use, if a use isn't listed, you can go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and get a special permit for it. That's no longer, that's not permissible. It's considered roving, sort of a roving town meeting efforts without a town meeting. So you have fixed that in another way, because a couple of years ago you allowed, you added a provision to allow the Zoning Board of Appeals to grant use variances where there are very particular circumstances that merit a variance. Again, not easy to get, but an option. So that's the biggest change. And then the second biggest change is really separating out addressing principal uses, regulating principal uses, and then having a whole separate section regulating the very specific accessory uses, and in particular things like the ADUs, as we were talking about, bed and breakfast establishments, common driveways, uses that have very special regulations to them for accessories to the principal use. So those are the chief changes. There's also quite a bit of a rewrite of the inclusionary zoning provisions. Not terribly different, but I think tailored more to promote actually providing the units, as opposed to being able to sort of give a contribution in lieu or locate them off site of a development. So it's a little stricter in that regard.
It's following the principle we put into the decision on the hotel project and the harbor project on the planning board. The same three options of how you meet the requirement are there, but they're now just stated in an order that people should read as an order of priority. On-site first, off-site second, payment in lieu is the absolute last option. So that we actually get units built.
We had talked a few months ago about changing the parking requirements so that people building multifamily residential would be obligated to provide one parking space per bedroom. Did that not make it in, or?
That's going to
That
be.
didn't make it in.
Article 7 is the spring.
You cut us off. We had to get everything ready by September, and we had not gotten to the parking yet.
We were all, the other two that I had reserved space for was Article 3 about consolidating some of the commercial districts. Because of all the terminology, we would have had to then have that article and then duplicate the changes to 4 and 5 all over again with districts renamed. So that'll be for the spring if we do that. 7, other than taking common driveways and putting it in uses, 7 will be dealt with in the spring. And then the other thing we were going to try to put in, we couldn't get in time, was actually to have an impact fee bylaw. And that, there's been an adaptation of Hanover's that we just haven't had time to discuss, but, and then there'll be some other things, and like I said, any substantive change to 5 will be in the spring. There may be some changes to the wind and solar articles. One of the things we had to do here is that solar uses had to be brought into Article 4. The Attorney General is hot to trot on that and could kill all of this if we didn't. So the judge has done a good job with that. We've met with AEC. We're going to meet with them some more. But any further changes to that in the spring, any new initiatives about climate change, what have you, might be the spring, probably better the fall. And then the housing choice zoning. We're, you know, the consultants we've got have been very good, and they really narrowed it down and kind of followed the lead of the committee, what we were looking for. And so that's been working very well, and I don't see why we won't see that way for the spring. But we're going to have to go in the winter, a number of forums and discussions with you folks about what it is that would be proposed.
Can I speak briefly?
But the consultants have been great, by the way.
The inclusionary zoning and why we felt that was important. Inclusionary zoning for people, I mean, put up some apartments, you have to have some provision for affordable housing. And we wanted to make sure that new units actually got built, because when you build these new units, it increases the number of dwelling units in the town, and we have to have 10% or more affordable. So if you increase the number of units, you increase the need for affordable units. So we want to make sure that the people who are actually building these actually will build those affordable units. Otherwise, financial contribution, oh, sure, we'll write a check. But it doesn't do what we need, which is more affordable units. And it also creates the need for even more affordable units. So we wanted to tie the ability to do multifamily development directly into a responsibility to create actual affordable units.
You know, the last 2 large-scale projects that the planning board has approved have both been approved with off-site development of units. And the Harbor project has already met that by taking 4 existing units. And they needed to provide 3. Now they actually are now providing 4, so 1 more than they needed. And they were existing units, so they didn't add to the denominator of total units in the town. So they've met their requirement. The other project hasn't started yet, but is also being allowed for economic reasons to do it.
I don't mean to take us on a tangent on housing choice, but you mentioned it just at a high level. Do you feel like we're on a good glide path to keep the state comfortable with what we're doing?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I will tell you, what I can tell you right now is looking at developing 2 districts, a larger one around our station, a smaller one near the Citrus station.
Okay.
When you see the maps and you see the numbers, and then you actually look at the land involved and whether it's actually feasible that some of it's going to be developed, if it's going to be torn down and redeveloped, you know, we'll go back and forth on that.
Okay.
But right now, you know, they've gone under marching orders of keep the districts out of the residential districts, and they've done that. And, you know, right now it's looking good that we can put something forward. And if you haven't paid attention, the AG has sued another town out in central Mass who's saying this number is crazy for us. We're a small town and they must have a train connection way out there. And they're getting sued. You know, so the AG is serious about enforcing that new law. But that should be ready for the spring as well. But we have to do some forums and a lot of work between our committee and your board on that. And you mentioned forums. Are you now going to sponsor a forum before town meeting? Because we were going to do that, but
We have a variety of forums that we want to do in a coordinated way, according to a schedule, and certainly zoning will be a part of it, and Chris will
I
connect.
don't, want- then I just don't
No, no, we
not
want-
worry about scheduling
Yeah, I
anything.
know, you will schedule it, you just provide the content.
Fine, perfect.
Tom, quick question, accessory dwellings, they're not allowed to be rented, or are they? Okay. I just
I
want
mean,
to,
well, in the sense of the owner of the property either has to live in the primary house or the accessory unit.
okay, but could they like Airbnb or just?
No, not that.
Accessory dwelling?
Not that,
to-
but they might, I assume they could rent, they could be on their property and either the accessory unit or the main house, if they move to the accessory, could be rented. But it's a long-term, traditional type of situation.
That allows seniors to age in place, if you will, by renting out either the accessory unit, or they may want to rent out the big house for more money.
Yeah.
But we don't want Airbnb.
Now, short-term rentals in the Airbnb world, we do not regulate this town. As you know, Classic 143 has ads for short-term rentals all the time. And we sent out a survey about that.
Yep.
But a pitifully small response rate.
Mhm.
Although those pitifully small responses did lean in one direction, but as I thought through that more and more and more, that probably should be dealt with in a general bylaw rather than a zoning bylaw. And I kicked around a draft of it and everything. We can discuss that at some later time, if you want to regulate them at all. We do not at the moment. Other towns do, other towns don't. So accessory dwelling units never contemplated, even in the current definition, being anything like that.
And I'm not suggesting we regulate them one way or another. I just was curious as to where we sat with this proposed article. The other confirmation I just wanted was, so government use, municipal buildings. It appears from the table of uses that they can be, government use can occur in any district.
Yes,
That's correct.
that's the current.
That's
state of-
correct. Now, for state and federal, that's the case anyway. Towns can't regulate state and federal uses. So they are allowed wherever they go. For town uses, this is a clarification. This was something the committee discussed and felt that most uses, town uses, should be exempt. So they should be allowed wherever the town decides to put them.
And
So,
that's any town, Judge Cutler, or is that just the
no,
town? of
your
Cohasset?
town, your town, no other town can do that.
What if another town wants to locate a government building in Cohasset?
And own the land, or another
they
town would buy land and locate their buildings here? I mean, I suppose we can clarify that by town, we mean town of Cohasset. Would that help?
I won't say out loud what I think you're talking about, but I'll run that by the judge later, but.
Yeah, I think if.
But
you
we
could
can
clarify
clarify that, we can clarify that by, when we refer to town with a capital T, we mean Cohasset.
That sounds good.
I don't think you'll ever see that happen in general sense, but I understand what I think you're talking about.
Well, now's a convenient time to confirm. Any other questions? No?
Thank you.
Okay,
So you just have to
We
vote
need to
to
vote.
send it to the planning board. And again, I think Cassandra's already written the ad, so we're going to be ready to go on the 27th.
So moved.
Second.
all those in favor, please vote aye.
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 So what was the motion? Article 5?
Article 4 and 5, moving to the planning board for a hearing. Thank you, Tom and Judge Cutler.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
For
night.
all of your time.
Mr. Rattenberg, ever appear, by the way?
I've been looking for periodically.
Okay, we have 5 minutes before we get to the Little League Field agenda item. Can I suggest if, I'll entertain a motion to move the KP Law waiver down for the Shrek down to right now, so we can maybe move that along? with
So
the-
moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, so we're looking at the KP Law waiver, Chris. This is to enable KP to,
Perform labor work for the Shrek, regional 911.
Is it for the Shrek or?
It's for
It's for the Shrek.
the 911. Yeah.
in a labor dispute with a former employee?
Yeah, and this may become something more longer term if they need it, because I think the council's been there since the beginning of the center, is
Okay.
trying to phase out of practice, so. That's, and again, because they represent other communities, there's really no conflict in that literal sense, because there's no overlap, and not of employment, so.
That's what I was getting confused about was, so, thank you for the clarification.
Does anyone have any further questions or comments? All right, I'd entertain a motion to approve the waiver to allow KP Law to perform the legal services as described in their letter.
So moved?
Second.
All those in favor, please vote aye. Aye. All right. I don't know, do we have time to open the warrant before 8:30? All right, special town meeting. I'd entertain a motion to move it to 8:27. We're a little bit ahead of time. We can do this.
Second.
All those in favor, please vote aye.
Aye.
All right, so open the warrant for special town meeting. Citizen, if we do that, then the citizens petition deadline is September 12th, 2023.
Close of business,
Close of business,
4:30.
4:30. So Chris Senior, if someone does submit a petition, just by way of reminder, we do offer any citizen who submits a petition the ability to meet with our counsel, KP, to review the petition to make sure it is legally sound. And, residents have done that in the past. So for anyone who's thinking about it, just know that's there. Are there any other questions, comments?
Is that prior to submission or is it post submission?
So we normally, it's so much easier to do it at general, so there's annual town meeting, that we actually schedule a day in advance.
Yeah.
With this, we haven't historically scheduled a day, but that service is still available. So if somebody does want to file a petition, they can just contact my office and we'll set up a time.
And it's best to do it before they
It's best to
submit
do it
it?
before you submit.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get at.
The deadline for the spring is much longer and it's much
Yeah, we
longer.
have
Yeah.
more lead
This
time.
is a second.
Yeah, got it.
And it's designed, especially our meeting is theoretically set up just for the purposes selected. It's not supposed to be throw everything that, that you can.
An annual recurring
Right,
town
right.
meeting.
So if we could clarify, if someone wanted to get on the warrant, what would they have to deliver by September 12th?
There's a form online they can pull down and they have to have a clearly written article with 100 validated signatures.
Oh, it's 100.
It's 100 for special. It's 10 for annual.
It's much more for special.
And you also have much longer time to get the signatures in the spring.
Yeah, you need 100 registered voters for a citizen's petition for fall town meeting. You need 10 for the spring.
That makes no sense.
I think it's fall town meeting is supposed to be succinct.
Yeah, no, I understand.
All right, would anyone like to move to open the warrant for the special town meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please vote aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right. We are at the agenda item relating to the requests that we have received relating to the speed limit near the Little League field. As I'm sure my fellow select board members know, we've received multiple requests in light of the numerous children and activities surrounding the Little League field, the swim center, the library, to change the speed limit from 30 miles an hour to 25 in that area. And when I say that area, I'm specifically talking about North Main Street. Probably where Wheelwright is heading into the village. Just
So,
for-
yeah, so all of the emails, everyone had a different, some were Wheelwright to the village, some were Sawyer Street to, I'm gonna butcher the name, Quanahasset Trail, North Main Street to the village, Barnes to the village, Wheelwright to the village, Sawyer Street to Quanahasset Trail, baseball fields to the village. So what is it?
Well, that's what we can discuss.
My sense of looking at the emails was the consensus was from Wheelwright into the village
Yes.
would be reduced in the areas where it is currently 30 miles per hour to 25 miles
25,
per hour.
yeah.
Yeah, I've been driving up and down there and just observing, and I think they have a point. It just does not, and 30 miles an hour is adequate. And I was driving back and forth. And people do have a tendency to exceed, even though the speed limit is 30, people are exceeding that by generally at least 10 miles an hour. And you can see the usual types of, drivers, and they're in a hurry to go someplace. And that area will not take it in any event. And there are kids there all the time. And yes, there's a sidewalk there, but there's also a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit there, which means everybody reads to be 45. So I think the citizens have a good point, and I think we should do it right away.
And I think Wheelwright would be a good place to draw the imaginary line, because Wheelwright seems to be where the recreational areas transition into.
And not the gate at the beginning of the field.
Yes. So that would cover the swim center, the ball fields, and Wheelwright.
Right.
Yeah, and I was driving there today looking at, so the existing sign, once you get past Wheelwright, says 30, right? And you're sort of coming up the crest of the hill. So we would defer to our police typically on where to place the sign in terms of beginning the 25 per mile an hour zone.
I did exchange emails with Chief Quigley. I don't know if he's on and if he would want
He is on,
You
okay,
can't see it because I pulled up the
okay.
photo
to,
representation.
then in the same spirit of I don't need to be a conduit, if the chief is interested in speaking his mind, I think we'd be happy to hear from him.
Good evening, board.
Can you take the stack by the-
Tonight, I did provide a slide from the presentation from 2021, I think April 2021, when we changed the speed limit. If you remember, North Main Street was 35 miles an hour from the Hingham line to Green Street. In 2021, we changed it as Green Street. It changed from 35 down to 20. So currently, from Green Street to the Hingham line is 30 miles an hour. I would recommend that if the board wants to drop that limit down to 25 or even 20, we do it from an intersecting point. So in other words, if you said, the middle of Wheelwright Park, well, there's really not a number there. We always look for a hard intersection, like the corner of Quanahasset and North Main. Anything south of that would be, 25 or 20 miles an hour to Green Street. So that's one of the only things I'd ask, along with if this does change, to give us some time to advertise this and change out signs. But other than that, there's no problem with this.
Yes, Emma.
So you answered one of my questions. Why, back when we did do all the speed reduction around town and there were the exceptions, why wasn't North Main Street down to 25 like all the other streets?
North Main Street is a commuter road, as well as King Street, as well as Forest Ave, and some of the others. So it's a main thoroughfare. So the board at the time, went with 25 miles an hour for most of it.
So it's presently 30, right?
It's 30 miles an hour from Green Street out to the Hingham line. It
Out to
used
the
to be
Hingham line.
35. They did reduce it.
Okay. Do you do a lot of tickets? I mean, occasionally I'll see a speed trap there. Is it a highly ticketed area for going? People exceeding?
There's a lot of tickets issued townwide. We
Hmm.
an inordinate amount of citations are issued by Cohasset Police as compared to departments we benchmark against. We have a very aggressive traffic program, but it's only as good as the manning or the call volume allows. So we can't. It's hard to assign someone to these traffic posts, for an hour or 2 hours. They're getting called away on other calls. There's only 2 sector cars on, most times in a sergeant. So, and they want it on King Street, they want it on Beechwood Street, they want it at the school crossings, they want it on Elm Street. So, we're really spread thin along with our call volume, which is up. So we're doing the best we can, but as always, I always, say to the board that the only real way to reduce speed is actually engineering the road, through traffic calming measures, bump outs, islands and things like that. And that was part of my presentation back in 2020 and 2021.
So, I mean, I would take the recommendation from Green Street even further. We had several people that live on Sawyer Street on the North Main Street end of Sawyer Street. And coming out of Sawyer Street, turning left is a nightmare, or turning right because of that curve heading south. And then as you approach going south, approaching the common and you go up the hill, there's a preschool there in the church. And so I would say for a benchmark from Quanahasset Trail to Depot Court, where the community center is, should be 20 or 20, whatever we're talking about, 25.
Well, currently from Green Street, almost like where Jerusalem is,
Yeah.
on North Main Street, from Green by Jerusalem, along North Main Street, through the village, all the way out to South Main and Summer is 20 miles an hour. And that
Oh,
village,
it's already 20. Okay, all right. Got it. Good.
I don't think you can make it less than 20, right, chief?
you really
We can
can't
try.
make it less than 20 because it's not a school zone. You can't go under
Yeah.
20.
Yeah, understood. Sorry.
So
Okay.
I think what's on the table then is for between Green Street and Chief, to your recommendation, specifying a street, Quanahasset Trail would be reduced from 30 miles per hour to 25 miles per hour. And then, Chief, I think you would also ask that we do this 4 to 6 weeks out to provide for appropriate sign changes and notification.
Correct. That's correct. It'd be nice to, if we do go with this change to have it in place by Halloween.
And chief, you talked about traffic engineering, which is, I take your point on this. Are there certain things that you would recommend the board consider, including in the context of a road and sidewalk stabilization fund, that we might want to do with this particular segment of road to do more island or other measures to slow traffic?
Yeah, I mean, we could bring in we'd need an engineer, but you can add islands on the street. You can do it with pavement markings, with paint. There's all kinds of, you can make speed tables that don't interfere with the plows. There's a lot of innovative things out there nowadays. And, those are the only true things that work. Enforcement is great, but it's so sporadic that it's sometimes ineffective.
Okay. Would you like to make a motion, Mr. Plex?
First, I would like to note that even if we do move ahead with reducing the speed limit in the areas that we're describing, following the chief's guidance, I think it would be worth following up to see, is it effective? And do we need to look at other measures to help reduce the speed that people are driving on those streets?
Mhm.
With that caveat, I'd be happy to make a motion that we reduce the speed limit for the section of North Main Street between Quanahasset Trail and Green Street from 30 miles an hour to 25 miles per hour, effective in 4 to 6 weeks at the discretion of the police department and the facilities department to give them an opportunity to implement it.
Second.
All those in favor, please vote aye.
Aye.
Okay, I know that we had gotten, Ellen, you said another request for Sawyer, is that right? Sawyer's already,
Sawyer's already 20.
yeah, that's why I was saying, I think Sawyer's already probably
That's
covered,
already
right?
Yeah.
Okay,
I didn't
Okay.
realize that it was.
okay, I just didn't want to forget
Sawyer,
about.
Sawyer is 20 in the school zones, 25 in the others.
Yeah.
areas.
Okay, because I know we got some feedback on that, so for the sake of those who might be listening about Sawyer, I just wanted to confirm. All right, is there anything else we think we need to discuss? Thank you, Chief, as
You're
usual.
welcome. Have a good night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Your wisdom, thank you. Okay, so where are we now? Let's see, I believe we are at select
Town manager update.
town manager update.
Two quick updates for you folks. First, the town has officially been welcomed as one of the pilot communities into MVP, which is a municipal vulnerabilities preparedness program 2.0. $95,000 to work on a refresh of the goals that were set several years back. This updated planning process is really to engage the community heavily and to build in social resiliency and community resiliency and get people really bought in. It's not so much just to get a plan, it's to get people engaged in the plan and to understand that there's environmental challenges and what do we do to help address flooding and wind damage. So Montana Castle has been a point on that sheet. So we're excited to be part of that the first group of communities that was just announced officially last week out in Stockbridge. So that's exciting news. And second, staff team is hard at work on preparing the Veterans Tax Work-Off Program for the Valor Act. So you will get that in a meeting in September, either the next one or the one after.
Chris, that's super helpful. Thank you for that update. That reminds me, it would be great to have just a quick sheet on the other tax abatement programs that we have going on and exemption/abatement. That's probably going to become important.
We're also looking at a senior tax worker program. We don't have one currently, so we're exploring how that would work.
Okay.
What approvals may or may not be needed for that.
Okay. Are there any questions? I do have a question about the MVP program.
Sure.
Given that we are probably going to be focusing on some resiliency bylaws, but we have a pretty packed fall town meeting schedule. Is there any way to harmonize the MVP efforts after we get through fall town meeting, including for the zoning bylaw working group, who may be interested in working in tandem with those guys, just to maximize the grant when we have the capacity to focus on it?
So let me say that the community engagement piece is what this is all about. So
Yeah.
it makes sense that there'd be an element of that, but let me circle back about town and find out. So
Okay.
it's kind of new. This is a new.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if there was
Thinking.
program guidelines.
Yeah, so we have to work with a particular provider the state is trying to line up. And the goal, though, the key to this is that people in the community will be trained to do this going forward. So we don't have to keep going back out to consultants. So the goal is to train a group of folks to be able to continue to do this work in the community. So it will be helpful in future conversations.
Are there any questions the board has? No. Okay, now we are moving on to, select board comments. We're already here, 8:43. Mr. Creighton, are there any comments you would like to make?
Just briefly, just not really on anything really pertinent, but as we stood as a board and did the Pledge of Allegiance, I was just reflecting that here we are in a small community. We're all elected by our neighbors, and we are making the laws that govern ourselves. And we take it for granted. But I think, it just struck me how fortunate we really are to be able to do this, and how the liberties and the ability to discuss things are so important. And I don't know, I was just taken with it, so I felt compelled to speak. Thank you.
Mr. Plex, would you like to follow Mr. Creighton's comment?
I can't follow that, but nothing to add.
Okay, Ms. Mar?
No, I think we covered everything on the
Okay.
schools earlier.
Okay. Of course, I always agree with Jack, particularly on patriotic matters. And I would just say that welcome back to school, all the kids. it's been a great first week, at least for my children. And
Must be that math teacher.
yes, it's all about the math teacher. There are a lot of school buses out there, a lot of kids, crossing the streets. So I just, in the vein of road safety and driving slow, please be mindful of that. But I wish everyone a good first week of school, full first week of school, because it is exciting to be back, even though it's a bit hot out right now. So, okay, next agenda item is approval of minutes. We have 3 sets of minutes, August 22nd, July 25th, and July 11th from 2023. Are there any comments or edits the board would like to make? The July 11th meeting minutes are the ones where we added in the information about the zoning and the parking and all that, FYI.
Thank you.
Would anyone like to make a motion to approve?
Do you want to,
All three?
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, do you want to do them one at a time?
Well, I just moved for all three.
Okay, but it's not seconded, so.
Do you have edits?
Unless
No,
there's
no,
a-
I don't have edits, but, so I was just looking, so Jack can't vote on July 11th. So having one motion for all three because he wasn't present. Paul's not here. He wasn't present on August 22nd, so that doesn't matter. So,
So it would be the 22nd, August 22nd and July 25th that we could vote on now?
that we could vote on those 2 sets of minutes. And then the 11th separately.
Okay, so I would move that we approve the minutes of the August 22nd and July 25th meetings.
I'll second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All right. And then we have one remaining set, which was,
And that's the one that Jack can't vote on?
I can't.
Jack can't vote on
I
those.
Right.
have to abstain.
Would the three be enough to approve that?
We'd have a quorum.
So I would move to approve the minutes of July 11th.
I'll second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Abstain.
Right. Right now, our regularly scheduled calendar has the next select board meeting for September 19th. I know the select board has been meeting a lot, which I greatly appreciate. I do think we probably need a meeting for September 12th for a variety of infrastructure issues that are on the horizon. And so I just wanted to see if anyone had any conflicts or concerns.
I'm good.
I think it might be fair to say, and I hate to say this, but I'm just going to do it because I think this will become the reality that we may end up meeting every Tuesday night until fall meeting, just given the
There's a lot going on.
work we have to get through. Even though I know we originally had scheduled, we had some gaps here and there, but if everyone could mentally prepare, and if you have any, conflicts, just let Tracy know. But otherwise, maybe going forward, standing wise, we'll just assume every Tuesday night until fall town meeting.
No problem.
Thank you. All right, are there any topics not reasonably anticipated within 48 hours? Okay, hearing none, I would
Motion
entertain.
dessert.
Was that a motion for dessert?
I stepped on my tongue. I was so angry. Motion, oh yeah, that's even better. Motion for dessert after we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Vote aye. Aye, okay. Before we leave, can we just sign these real quick for Tracy so we don't need to?